The F1 news cycle does not stop. It is the 13th of the 8th, 2024. The time is 5 minutes past 10. And we've got to talk about the F1 Nation podcast with one Tom Clarkson and one Damon Hill, one of my personal favourites. And in that podcast, you will always get a drip feed of news. On the latest edition, they've talked about Adrian Newey. They've talked about, and then we get the bloody echo, doesn't it, Cameron? Of course. Always prepped. Always ready, Cameron, as always. Technical difficulties et al. But no, we need to talk about some things. We need to talk about Adrian Newey. We need to talk about Damon Hill's characterisation of Lando Norris. And also we need to talk about some flagrant pseudo disrespect on one Maximilian Verstappen, courtesy of one Tom Clarkson. Oh, the humanity. Let's get into it. Firstly, let's talk about Lando Norris. Damon Hill talks about McLaren's mistakes, that if Lando Norris loses the championships by circa 7 points this year, that McLaren aren't going to be happy. Should they have effected team orders the other race weekend? Should they have done? Should they have let Oscar Piastri win? Does every point matter in a world championship as at August 2024? I think you can make the case. I think Damon Hill is testament to that, having lost the 1994 championship by only a couple of points to one Michael Schumacher. This goes back to the old adage that potentially McLaren aren't acting in the best interest of their drivers, that they aren't moving just yet like a world championship team. And that's understandable, is it not? Their experience gives rise to these sort of things. And McLaren haven't been competing at the front of the pack for the longest time. I think we can forgive them that. So too, Damon Hill talks about Lando Norris as versus Oscar the Iceman Piastri. He says of Lando Norris that his peaks of late this season have been higher than Oscar Piastri's, but his lows, his troughs have been lower. That the weakness in Lando Norris's performance has been indeed his variability. That Oscar Jack Piastri, aka the Iceman, his level, his average has been higher than Lando Norris's. And I think Damon Hill, the legend that is one-time world champion, hits on a point there. Oscar Piastri has made fewer mistakes. His peaks might not have been as high, but his lows haven't been as low. And it's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic between the two McLaren drivers plays out between now and the end of the season. We have 10 races. It's going to get techie. Go on then, should we talk about Max Verstappen? Because Tom Clarkson had some things to say. And I think this is where we get very techie, a tad polemic, a tad controversial. Tom Clarkson puts his thesis forth as follows. Given where Red Bull have ended up before the summer break as far as the competitive landscape, that Red Bull weren't close to McLaren and Mercedes, at Silverstone in the wet and at Belgium in dry conditions, that the Red Bull's dry pace isn't anywhere near that of Mercedes and McLaren. Put a pin in that. We'll revisit. I'm not sure that's a million miles away from the truth, but what does that mean for Max Verstappen? Put a pin in it. We will revisit. I think, continues Tom Clarkson, when Max comes back, he has to realise this. He's not going to win every race in the second half of the season over the remaining 10 races between now and the end of the season. That the competition as far as machinery is far too close. He's got to realise that he needs to pay the percentages. Hang on a second, Tom Clarkson. The old adage comes to mind, that Senna's old adage, that if you no longer go for a gap, then you're no longer a racing driver. What do you expect from Max Verstappen, Tom Clarkson? Play the percentages. I understand the point that he's trying to make, that there is travails and downside ramifications from trying to go for a race win and 25 points each and every single race when it's not possible. Could you argue that Max Verstappen fell foul of that thesis, that principle at Hungary? Potentially. Was he trying to force a round shape into a square hole as far as solving for his automotive pugilism Rubik's Cube? Potentially. But he is Max Verstappen. Is he not, Tom Clarkson? What do you expect from the chap? He's got to play the percentages. I don't think Max Verstappen, his DNA, his fundamental constitution will allow him to play the the percentages. And I don't think if we despise snowflake F1, if we think that the F1 has become overly sanitized, then what do we want him to change for? I like that Max Verstappen is a killer. I like that he's coming to get the dub each and every single time. That anything less than 25 points is less than satisfactory for one Maximilian Verstappen. What do you want from your F1 drivers? Or do you want them to be happy with a 5th place? Happy with a cheeky 10th, getting a single point on a race weekend? I don't want that from my racing drivers. I'll tell you that from now. Tom Clarkson continues. Max Verstappen will need to take himself a 5th place when that's all the car is good for. Instead of forcing the issue, trying to force something that might lead to an accident with another car or lead to a spin. What are we doing, chat? Flotsam and Jetsam F1, Mark? Exactly that, right? I can't believe that Tom Clarkson, legend of the F1 space, F1 journo, accredited. I can't believe that this is what he's encouraging. Flotsam and Jetsam F1 after Claude settings. What? Again, there's got to be some intelligence and there has to be some maturity in Max Verstappen's driving. Potentially, he won't have a car capable of winning every single race, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't try. I can't believe at this stage, August of 2024, that this is what we're advocating for. Listen, I watched Senna and I watched Prost. So too did I watch Mansell and Schumacher. You think you could pitch this sort of thing at them? They would laugh you out to the shop. Chap, yes, drive with maturity and be realistic and pragmatic, but get yourself a 5th place. What? No, not as the modus operandi, not as the pole sitter as far as objectives are concerned. Hell, no. Max Verstappen would laugh you out to the shop for suggesting such a thing. Clarkson continues. When the performance isn't there, like it wasn't at Singapore last year, just get what's possible. Drive with a maturity, he says. Take a 5th place when that's all that the car is good for. If he goes in, and here's where it gets techie, chat. Very, very techie. If Max Verstappen goes for the win every single time, he won't win the championship. Clarkson says he's keen to see over the next 10 races how being a bit older, how being a bit more mature, how being a 3 soon to be 4-time champion has changed Max Verstappen as a driver. Oh, the humanity. You know what irks me? It's this sentence. If he goes for the win every time, he won't win the championship. What do you expect Max Verstappen to do? What do you want from that chap? Why are we so keen to lean into this flotsam and jetsam F1 snowflakery, as if Formula 1 over the past few years hasn't already been overly sanitised? And now we're trying to take the killer, take the born winner, change the fundamental DNA and fabric of Maximilian Verstappen. One of the true old school, the die-hard ones, one of the only ones that's left on the grid of 20 in 2024. What are we doing here? This makes no sense, Damon. Hill lost because Shuichi, well, gee, fair. I don't hate that. Visual Hermione floor was damaged and a lot. Listen, I just think this is chaos. Genuinely, I understand Tom Clarkson's sentiment. There will need to be maturity. Now that there has been a paradigm shift as far as the competitive landscape, Maximilian Verstappen no longer has the ostensibly dominant car as at August of 2024. So will he need to nick himself a 5th place? Absolutely. But does that mean that he needs to change his fundamental constitution? He's a born winner. That's why people all around the world love themselves some Maximilian Verstappen. He comes to every single session and every single race weekend expecting to extract from that circumstance 25 points. Don't listen to one Tom Clarkson, Max Verstappen. You've got 10 races left. I want to see Max Verstappen try and get himself 25 points each and every single race weekend. Why? Well, because that's who Max Verstappen is. What are we doing here?